almost by definition, eponyms will always have a story. I've seen them described as little invisible monuments, a kind of nod that says, I was here, I started this.
One of them I didn't know was the Jacuzzi.
That's the one that makes me laugh the most, because you've drawn them with little hairs on their chests.
And the fact that it's the Jacuzzi brothers.
The Jacuzzi brothers.
It's just such a fabulous name.
Lord Sugar has actually stated what the definition of a Pellereau is in my last board meeting. When you touch your left ear by using your right arm and you go over the top of your head, that is apparently in his belief that's a Pellereau. That sort of example of massively overcomplicating something for apparently no seeming reason.
Hello and welcome to Sketchplanations, the podcast. Coming at you every other Thursday, quenching your thirst for curiosity and wonder at life's quirks and quiddities. Inspired by the collection of sketches at sketchplanations.com. I'm engineer and broadcaster Rob Bell, and with me once again is designer and creator of Sketchplanations John O'Hay, and established entrepreneur and past winner of The Apprentice, it's Tom Pellereau. Hello, you two little munchable misfits.
I've never been called a munchable misfit before.
Wow.
But I like it.
Good.
I don't like it quite so much. Put that out there.
It's an endearing term, I feel, a misfit.
A misfit.
Munchable. Probably more I had issue with.
That's just lazy alliteration.
Yeah, macho misfits. That could have been an option.
There you go. Hello, you two big macho misfits.
I'm not sure how accurate it would be now.
Doesn't matter, it's the intro.
No one knows.
This time, we're talking eponyms. When the name or word for something comes from a person or a place associated with it. As a quick example, the sandwich. Now, I absolutely love Jono's sketch for this because there's so much colour and character that's caught in the figures he's depicted. And I'll be honest, they make me laugh. It should be up on your device screens now as the artwork for this episode. But if not, or if you want to take a closer look, you can see it at sketchplanations.com. And this week especially, I'd advise you to check it out because Jono's linked to 60 other sketches in his collection up there that are also eponyms, right? So it's really worth going on to sketchplanations.com to check it out and read the caption and look at all the ones that it could be. In that intro itself is a flavour to where we're going to go with the podcast. And if you'd like to get in touch with us about anything in this episode or any others for that matter, then you can send your emails to
hello@sketchplanations.com.
Thank you, Tommy. Also, let's get into exactly what an eponym is. Let's throw out some fun examples and consider some of the less obvious implications of this trend. Let's podcast. Jono, please, can you kick us off by telling us a bit more about eponyms and why they caught your attention enough to want to explain them in one of your sketches?
Sometimes doing a sketchplanation is an opportunity for me to be really sure that I know something. And if you're like me, you might have heard the word eponym or eponymous, and perhaps at one point you knew what it meant, and perhaps you thought you kind of knew what it meant, and perhaps you sort of sometimes forgot what it meant anyway. That was what was happening with me. I'd be like, oh, yeah, eponymous. That's, I think it's...
Yeah, that's a thing.
Yeah. Anyway, so I was like, I think I need to do a sketch to be sure about this once I confirmed indeed that it was what I thought it was. And I just thought it's quite a fun one to do because there's some really neat examples of eponyms, and some of them are really nice examples of essentially something that's named after somebody, but you didn't always realize that it was named after somebody. And you gave one.
I'd say some surprising ones.
Yeah. And one in your intro, which I really like, is the sandwich. And of course, I do know that now, and I probably learned that at some point, 15 years ago or something. But certainly as a kid growing up, it's just a sandwich, right? It's like, could be like a baguette or a bun or something like that, right? You know? And you don't realize that actually it comes from the 4th Earl of Sandwich. And so I just thought it was quite fun to collect a few together and put it down for the record and go, like, if you've heard this and you're not 100% sure all the time what it is, now you will know for good what an eponym is.
Do you want to go through the So there's 6 examples in your sketch. Do you want to just go through them just quickly? One of them is the 4th Earl of Sandwich, who invented the sandwich.
Yeah. Can we get onto some of the stories of them perhaps in the future of the episode? Another one is a really classic one. The first one that came to mind was the Rubik's Cube, which everybody knows.
Yeah, good.
One of them I didn't know, I think, until I started looking up eponyms and reading up about it, was the Jacuzzi.
I love that.
Yeah.
That's the one that makes me laugh the most, because they've got you've drawn them with little hairs on their chests. I love it.
I have.
And the fact that it's the Jacuzzi brothers.
The Jacuzzi brothers.
It's just such a fabulous name. Apparently there was, I mentioned it, there was like a lawsuit between the brothers later on in life, and the lawsuit was called Jacuzzi versus Jacuzzi, which is a pretty cool lawsuit name. So I got them relaxing with a cocktail and some hairy chest in the jacuzzi of their own making. Laszlo Biro for the pens. In the US, I believe people are more familiar with the Bic pen, which is also an eponym after somebody Bic, who came up with the pen, which is so popular and cheap and everywhere. Diesel fuel, which you might not realize is named after somebody in person, but it's named after Rudolf Diesel.
Mm-hmm.
And there was the original sort of diesel engines, which is also named after him. And then a brilliant one of my favorite, which is the Silhouette.
That blew my mind, that one. And I've got questions about that one. Etienne de Silhouette, right?
It was named after Etienne de Silhouette, and the brief history of that. He was this French politician during a tough time when they'd had some like extravagant spending, and he was like it's
like the treasurer, right?
Yeah, guy in charge of the finance thing. And so, you know, like a good politician, he made some tough decisions and put a period of austerity which nobody liked, and a silhouetted portrait where you just basically do an outline of somebody became quite popular because they were really cheap and quick to do. So instead of getting a fancy portrait, you just get like a silhouetted portrait because you didn't have enough money to do a proper one.
And a guy with a pen.
Yeah.
Charcoal, possibly.
Charcoal, exactly.
So it became synonymous as well as eponymous, but it became synonymous as being like a cheaper version, right? Because of Etienne de Silhouette was slashing stuff and was a bit cheap, is how it was seen.
Well, I think he was trying to fix the country's finances, but people didn't like it. So it's a bit of a slight on him, as far as I know. It's like, oh, we'll call this a silhouette because he's penny pinching.
What troubles me about this is that the French word for shadow is silhouette.
What?
But did that come
He
after
was a shadow.
The silhouette
Possibly.
became...
But shadows were around before, surely.
Oh, it's a remarkable coincidence.
Yeah.
Well, let's investigate that.
I struggle with that.
Provide the answer at the end of the podcast.
Great.
And what I quite like about Etienne Silhouette is Etienne is my middle name. Not a lot of people know that, and it's fairly unusual. It's quite nice to see how you actually spell it. I've always struggled a little bit. Spell your own name.
You can always look up the eponyms.
To be honest, Tommy, you know, as someone who's dyslexic, your name, it's very ironic.
It's a real trouble starter. I genuinely, at primary school, I used to have to look at my name tag in my socks to ensure I'd spelled my surname properly.
Fair enough.
Work. Yeah, I do remember doing that when I was very young.
Fair
Actually,
enough.
not very young.
Remember somebody tutored a kid who was dyslexic and his name was Giuseppe Farinelli. Yeah. And you're like, well, if you're 5, you have no chance.
We digress, potentially.
Sorry. We digress, and we only laugh because, Tommy, you're here.
Thank you.
But it strikes me like almost by definition, right? Eponyms typically will always have a story.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, well, that was one of the things where there's a really nice podcast episode of the 99% Invisible by Roman Mars about eponyms, and he discusses it. He says that eponyms are one of his favorite things because by definition, whenever there's an eponym, it's come from something or someone, and so there's a history behind this word. Yeah. Whereas, like, I mean, you know, you can look at where the word bun came from, but it's probably much less interesting than sandwich, which has a real story behind it. Yeah.
Bum or bun?
I said bun.
Sorry.
Because I was back on the bread products.
Gotcha.
Or bum, I don't know. Probably doesn't have as interesting story.
I've seen them described as little invisible monuments.
Oh,
A kind of nod that says, I was here, I started this.
Yeah. And actually, it's
Which
quite
I quite
interesting
like.
because some people choose the name to be named after them, and maybe we'll get to it, but something like the Dyson vacuum cleaner,
Yes.
like they chose that, whereas other things, Etienne de Silhouette didn't choose it to be called de Silhouette, right? And he probably didn't want it to be.
and some of them are definitely a slant towards that person. Like,
Yes.
they really didn't want to be named after that, but it kind of caught on as a kind of slur towards the individual potentially.
There's a really nice book by somebody who I've done a number of sketches from, Mark Forsyth, called the Etymologicon, which is all about etymology, which is where words came from. And he gives an example of the word masochism, and which is after, let me get it right.
Is it an eponym?
Is an eponym after Leopold von Sacher-Masoch, who wrote this book called Venus in Furs, all about dominant women wearing furs, and pushing him around, and it came named as masochism. During his lifetime, it was invented by a psychiatrist, and he was like, I don't really like that term being named after me, but here we are, it's stuck.
Yeah.
So I feel like we'll probably go through quite a few examples because they're fun, and interesting, and for me, it's like gathering all these little stories together, and I love that. So come on, Tommy, have you got some examples or an example to kick us off with?
So as an inventor, as a creator of product, I love looking into the history of where things come from. And first of all, it's amazing how names just created, right? Sort of almost everything has a name, and you often kind of wonder where it all came from. And firstly, the scientific concepts that we have, the volt, the watt, the ohm, the amp, the Tesla, all these things are named after the person who created it. Voltaire, ohm, Tesla. But these were scientists of hundreds of years ago in most instances, I think, Jono. A lot of this scientific sort of research happened and discoveries. And they were that person, or they were the person who was credited with it. Sometimes,
yeah, that's interesting.
Which is very interesting because there were probably actually 10, 20 people working. Often there were loads of women also helping, and they obviously didn't get mentioned at all. And Marie Curie, who worked with her husband, the Curies, she's one of the most sort of famed early scientists. But all these things need a name, and so often they're then hooked on the scientist who was most researching it at the time.
In that sort of context, it's almost like the definition of success in your life.
In your field.
Like I did my research and I came up with something, and it's named after me, and everybody's using that now. Job done.
Isn't that cool?
So you know how Dyson naming his brand of products, that's not an eponym. That's a brand that's been decided after a name. Yeah. But do you think you could kind of seed it in? It's like, I've heard people have started calling this the Dyson. It's a bit embarrassing. And then that kind of rumor starts to spread, and people actually do start calling it the Dyson, and then you Dysoning again.
Yeah, and actually in hindsight, I look back at my Curve Now file sheet going, should have called that a Pellereau. Really, that would have been quite cool. Although I was advised actually by the lawyer who represented me when I did the apprentice contract with Lord Sugar not to involve my own name, because then technically Lord Sugar would own half of my name.
Oh,
so I was told that, probably don't call the company Pellereau, probably don't call your product Pellereau, because then technically you are going to have to sign the rights to your name away.
Yeah.
It's quite interesting. I do actually think it would have been quite fun though. This interesting kind of ego.
You got to wait until you design something circular or like a ring, donut shape, because then it's the Pellereau.
Pellereau. Amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you, Robbie. I'll save that one away.
There's lots in science and maths and physics, aren't there? And I've got the Fibonacci sequence, the sum of like the two numbers that come before it in the sequence. So 1 + 1 is 2 + 1 and 2. You know what I mean. Anyway, named after Leonardo da Pisa, whose nickname was Fibonacci, or AKA Fibonacci. But he didn't invent it. He only popularized it. So it's one of those. And then Pythagoras, apparently he didn't discover Pythagoras either.
Is that right?
But the name stuck with him. Or, as a Scottish guy who I went to school with, did my GCSEs with, called it Pythagoras.
Pythagoras.
Yeah.
Sounds more mysterious.
Bernoulli. Can I chuck another one out
Bernoulli
there?
equation.
The Bernoulli equation, yeah. Bernoulli principle with like air pressure and air flows.
We
It's
are in
what
danger of becoming a
describes-
highly technical only podcast here.
No, it won't, because check this out. So the famous Bernoulli equation or Bernoulli principle that I know and that we all know is what describes what keeps aeroplanes up in the air, right? It's the airflow over the wings, or partly what does that. But apparently there were about 8 different Bernoullis all involved in maths and engineering, and they're all in the same family, right? And apparently there were massive arguments between a lot of them. So there was Johann Bernoulli, who stole the credit for his brother Jacob's discoveries, right? And they weren't the one we're talking about. They weren't the Bernoulli principle that we're talking about here with airflow. And then Johann's son, Daniel Bernoulli, he was the one who came up with the air pressure stuff, Bernoulli's principle. He won a prestigious scientific prize for his discoveries, only for his dad to enter the competition as well, who came second, and they never spoke again. It's the story. It's the human story behind the
What a
eponyms.
ridiculous family.
I know.
And on that note, can I talk to you about the Ferris wheel?
Come on, bring it on.
Invented by George Washington Ferris Jr. in 1893, a civil engineer who designed the Ferris wheel as an attraction for the Chicago World Expose that year. It was designed as the American answer to the Eiffel Tower, which had been the big thing at the Paris Expose the previous year. But it didn't really work out, unfortunately, for Mr. Ferris, in the fact that there was a lot of arguments about actually who deserved the money from it and the profits, and he died a kind of pauper, aged 37, having his wife walked out on him, and he died penniless of a horrible disease. So it wasn't necessarily the greatest thing, but he was an engineer, and the first one was big. It's like 80 odd meters tall. The first
It's like
one,
the London Eye or something.
which is
Yeah.
like pretty big. It's like, oh, we're just going to design the first one. We'll make the first one. We'll make it massive.
Well, if you're trying to compete with the Eiffel Tower,
Go big or go home.
Wow,
It
yeah.
is. But I feel like probably a number of eponyms are allocated or adopted posthumously, right, after whoever that person is has died.
Yeah. Although the Kalashnikov rifle, considered the most deadly weapon ever created by Mikhail Kalashnikov, who was drafted to the Soviet army as a tank engineer and driver, and rised really high. Like, he became lieutenant general, which is like third off from the very top. And apparently he created it whilst he'd been injured in the Second World War, and he heard all these complaints about how rifles just kept on jamming and wouldn't really work and all that sort of stuff. But do you know why it's called the AK-47?
Oh, I do, and I can't remember.
it's not like WD-40, is it? It's like the 40th go of it.
It's sort of similar. It's automatic or automato Kalashnikov, created in 1947 originally.
Great. Yeah.
AK-47.
Good, Tommy.
You could have the AP-25, the Auto Pellereau in 2025.
Yeah, good.
And there's a lot of rumours, like towards the end of his life, that he kind of regretted it, but he was a Soviet hero, and it's still one of the cheapest rifles you can make, because it's just printed sheet metal, bits of wood, and it just keeps on working and working and working. That's why it's been so devastatingly lethal.
See, that's an interesting point about an eponym, isn't it? So this has your name on it and has killed God knows how many people. And
Yes.
yeah, so it's a curious legacy. I mean, obviously, if you're
Yeah.
inventing guns, you probably expect that to be the case, but whether you want to be remembered for it, I don't know.
And there will be a number like that. I've got a story of one where,
What is that story?
well, it's I'm actually
You're
wondering
teasing us here.
if it's the other way round. So I will edit this bit out here. Blah, 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 blah.
Oh, to be the editor.
So this is more what happens in the case where, so something's named after someone who then later goes on to kind of become infamous, or to have not lived a good life beyond what they might have already done.
So Hitler's early paintings weren't as popular as they might have been, for example.
What do you know? This does come to Nazis.
Okay.
So it's in the case of the Reiter syndrome, named after Hans Reiter. So it's kind of a joint pain that's tied to a form of systemic inflammation, by all accounts, according to my notes here. And it's named after the German physician Hans Reiter. So this is in the early part of the 20th century, after World War One. And he'd worked with injured soldiers in World War One and discovered that this was a condition. And so that condition became known after him, the Reiter syndrome. And then in the Second World War, he went on to commit Nazi war crimes, experimenting on inmates at a detention camp. But it kind of became known as the Reiter syndrome in like 1940. And then obviously in the 41, 42, 43, Reiter wasn't such a great chap contributing to humankind. So then what happens to that eponym?
It's part of history.
Collectively as a culture, do we just say, right, no, we need to change it? Or is it done officially? What happens to that? It's a bit like the statues, right? It's a bit like statues to figures.
Yeah, or street names.
Dubious pasts, or street names,
Yeah,
exactly.
Things like that you might just want to go, you know what? We don't want
I
to
don't call it that
remember
anymore.
that person anymore, given what happened. Perhaps we should change it. Yeah.
So there's that side to eponyms, which I found interesting. I hadn't thought about that. At all.
Yeah. There was another one that they mentioned in the 99% Invisible podcast I thought was really interesting, was a lot of medical conditions are named after the people who sort of isolated or observed it, or sometimes the people who suffered from it. So, you know, if you suffered from some terrible, debilitating thing, would you want it named after you if you were the only person? Maybe not so much, but I think that definitely happens. There was another one, like a well-known disease is Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease.
Yeah, CJD that became known as, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so there's
mad cow's disease.
I believe so, yeah.
Yeah.
But there's an argument, you know, I think the actual name for it is subacute spongiform encephalopathy, which actually is a name which tells you about what is going on in the disease, actually is informative in its name, as opposed to one which is just sort of recognizing the people who observed it first.
So those words, what were they again?
You're just trying to trip me up. I see it as subacute spongiform encephalopathy.
That's right. So those actually are describing the condition, like in terms of the system.
This is
in your
what
body
happens to your brain. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. In the name of the condition, which is probably quite sensible.
Which could be helpful.
Yeah.
If you're learning it.
Yeah.
You know, if you're learning about it.
But that has a good example also of what you mentioned, where you have Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, and perhaps there were lots of other people who were also involved in some form or other in the observing and identifying this condition, but get left off the name.
Because Creutzfeldt-Jakob, that's two people, is it? Creutzfeldt and Jakob.
I believe so.
Yeah, I think it is. But you're saying so there might have been a whole team of people who were involved in that research, or
and you know, normally there are, just like in any science and engineering, it's very rarely is it one person who really does everything, right? So eponyms are a curious thing where you choose. We're going to give it to this person. It's a bit like, you know, the Nobel Prize is always that challenge, isn't it? You know, one person gets the Nobel Prize, but a lot of other people enabled, you know, standing on the shoulders of giants and all that.
Yes.
But we only remember the winners, or the people who get their eponyms.
And that potentially brings me to an interesting one, which is one of the most famous, is the Hoover, or a Hoover, or to Hoover the carpet. All that sort of stuff. And you mentioned Dyson earlier. He obviously has a dislike for this, but Hoover was actually invented by James Spangler, which could have been an interesting name, the Spangler, but who invented it for his cousin Susan Hoover and her husband William Hoover, who then brought it to life. Enormous effort to make Hoover into the incredible company that it became and still is. But it was named after them rather than him. Still an eponym, clearly. But it's ironic that it's one of the most famous, and yet the Hoovers possibly were the ones who actually kind of invented it.
Well, it's like I was saying about Pythagoras as well, you know, and and Fibonacci. Yeah, it's whoever. I guess it's whoever shouts the loudest, whoever starts spreading those rumors around.
Tends to be
a little bit.
Whoever wins the war writes the history.
There you go, Tommy. That's it.
I listened to a book called Green Lights by Matthew McConaughey recently, and he told the story of his career. He basically kept getting all these rom-coms roles, and he was doing really well getting rom-coms. And then he was like, "No, I want to do stuff that really speaks to me." And so he said no to all these roles for ages, and then basically didn't get anything for 2 years. And then finally he did get something. He was being interviewed by a reporter, and he says in the book that he felt like it ought to have a name, this period of him not doing anything. And he said he was speaking with this reporter, and he said, I was having a chat with a reporter, and he said, "Oh, it's kind of like a reconnaissance."
Nice.
And this reporter said, "Wow, that's great. Maybe that could stick." And it became known as the reconnaissance. His period was absolutely seeded by him, quite deliberately. Worked a charm. It's a
It
good
would
word.
do if it was Matthew McConaughey, because I think he probably can charm you.
Yeah.
Probably rather well.
For sure.
That's very good.
Yeah.
Can I come back to the Hoover one?
Yeah.
Because I wonder about brands. Can brands be eponyms? I think it is. It's because, so Tommy, the example you're talking about there, the Hoover. Hoover is a brand name. It's a brand of vacuum cleaner, right?
Yeah.
But it's become, and it's become synonymous with the vacuum cleaner.
Yeah.
So my understanding is it's a proprietary eponym. So in principle, they're the only ones who are supposed to be able to use it. And there's this really good term, I don't know if you guys came across it, it's called genericide,
Yeah.
which is basically like death by being made generic.
And it can counteract your trademark.
Exactly. And so this is what all these companies struggle against. So Hoover, we might think, oh, it's brilliant that everybody calls everything just Hoover. I'm going to Hoover the carpet. And they go, no, this is terrible because it devalues our brand, and anybody can call their product Hoovering the carpet now. And it's not
I
protected.
bought this Hoover and it's rubbish.
Yeah.
Well, it actually
It's
might
not
not
a
be a
Hoover.
Hoover.
It's a vacuum cleaner. Yeah, exactly. And so, there's this great term called, I thought it was brilliant, genericide, which is, death because you became so generic. And obviously, like,
Genericide.
Googling it, I'm going to Google instead of I'm going to search. And so some brands fight very hard against that genericide.
That's interesting. Yeah, okay. Something else I learned about where a brand becomes a verb or a noun, like Google, Hoover, is that apparently when you're using it as a verb or noun, you shouldn't be using the capital letter if there is a capital letter. So I'm hoovering the carpet.
With a Hoover, you'd have a small H on the first one and a big one on the second one, and then a little TM after it if you're being really particular.
So is that the same with Google though as well? Oh, where did you find that? I Googled it. Would that just be with the lowercase g? I Googled it.
Yeah, I think their name is, by the sound of it.
I mean, technically, you're not supposed to do that, but I don't know.
Ooh, are they going to get me?
They're going to come around.
Going to come after me on the
Excuse me.
podcast.
Google trademark police.
No, I think you can. Well, you can't write that on packaging if you're a competitor.
There were some other really good ones like Hoover, which I didn't realise at all. Just like
go on.
Sandwich. Do you know, like Zipper? Zipper was the name of some boots which had like the first hookless fastener in.
Oh, right.
And now a zip is obviously loads of people make zips, and it's not just a zipper, but a zipper was a product originally.
Didn't know that one.
There is one company that really dominates the zip market.
YKK.
Yeah.
Somehow. Like,
Japanese.
Can you make a new, better zipper, please?
I really don't think it's possible. They are amazing. Like the intricacies and the repeatability and reliability is insane.
In 100 years, we'll still be using the same.
I do think about it quite a lot, though, John.
Just Escalator. Do you know that? That was
Escalatore.
Escalator was a brand name for the Otis elevator company. And
brand name. Sorry.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah. And it has passed into such general use that they've lost all trademarks, and anybody can call their product an escalator now.
Wow.
I think Thermos are in a similar position, but
also a trademark doesn't last forever.
Yeah.
A lot of these companies try to turn their products from like a trademark into a copyright because copyright lasts 70 years. Patents last 18, trademarks 25 and on, copyright 70. I think they're trying to extend that at the moment. So, and works of art also have slightly different rules as well, which is fascinating aspect of intellectual property law.
That's really good knowledge.
Kind of what I do is quite an important part of it. But yeah, thank you.
Yeah. No, it's good knowledge. But there was a brilliant, hilarious video of lawyers at Velcro singing, "Please don't call it Velcro. If it's not made by Velcro, it's a hook and loop," basically. And you should definitely watch it. It was about 3 minutes long. And
I will link to that in the podcast description.
I didn't even know. I thought Velcro was just the name for the thing, but it's not. Velcro is a Velcro brand, apparently.
But was it named after Velcro? Because Tupperware is named after Mr. Tupper. I do reckon you could have a lot of fun with people being like, yeah, there was a Mr. Post-it.
You can say that about your kids. Your kids, they'll believe anything.
Mr. TV.
You said so. I did look to see if there are eponyms around our surnames.
Bell,
obviously. Pellereau and Hay. Bell, there's quite a few.
Yeah,
quite a few.
There's the brand like Bell's Whiskey.
Yeah.
And then there's like the Bell Curve.
Yes. Yeah, you've been very busy.
Diving Bell.
What a family.
I mean, it's unbelievable.
It's the Jacuzzis, the Benuis, and the Bells. Yeah. Unbelievable. Yeah.
I couldn't find anything on Pellereau or Hay. I don't think it's been
with Jono's,
ever been used as an
the
eponym.
spelling has changed.
It's just waiting for me to make my own eponym.
Robbie, ironically, I am told that my name comes from a type of boat, Pellereau. So it's obviously water at the end, and the Pella is apparently a type of sort of one person,
short for propeller,
kind of like it's a big round disc kind of thing you sit on, and from France. So I'm told that that's where my name comes from.
Oh, very good.
There you go.
Nice. That's entomology, is it?
No, entomology is the study of insects.
Oh, crap. Etymology.
Etymology is the study of words. Easy mistake to make.
Oh, my God.
You're going to play with the big boys, Robbie.
It happened in Trivial Pursuit once, so I know that.
Can I give you guys two that haven't come up? And it's my delight that they haven't come up. I knew this would be an example-heavy episode because that's basically what we've got. Can I talk about the word boycott? To boycott something.
Well, the Jeffrey.
Not the Jeffrey, the Charles.
You can talk about it.
So boycott. I'm going to boycott. I don't agree with them at all. I'm going to boycott that event.
Individual.
There was a Charles Boycott.
Wow.
Who was an English, and I'm going to read this, is an English land agent in the 1880s in Ireland. And he was working for a wealthy absentee landlord, right? So he was looking after this land that the landlord owned, but wasn't really involved in it, over in Ireland. And at the time, Irish tenant farmers were struggling under high rents and unfair evictions from land. And so the Irish Land League, which was like a tenants' rights movement, decided that they'd had enough. And so when Boycott tried to evict tenants from their land, the Land League came up with a new form of non-violent protest. And instead of using violence, they simply ignored him out of existence. His workers abandoned him, shops refused to serve him, the postman wouldn't deliver his mail, and he basically had to flee town because no one would engage with him in any way whatsoever.
And to make it even worse, they named it after him.
Well, and so, that whole situation made headlines, but over in Ireland and in the UK, and in Britain, I should say. And within months, boycott became the global term for an organised social ostracisation. How about that? I loved that one.
So harsh.
It's a great story. I had no idea.
No, nor did I.
That's brilliant. Thank you, Robbie.
Well, it's like calling sort of a peaceful defiance the Gandhi or something, isn't it?
Yeah. You've been Gandhied.
I'm organising a Gandhi.
So the other one, and this is quite story heavy, but so the other one is the word Maverick. He's a right Maverick. Samuel Maverick was a Texan lawyer, politician, land baron in the mid-1800s, and despite owning a ton of land and cattle, he didn't actually care about cows. And so when his cattle started roaming the land, he famously refused to brand them, to brand them like everyone else did, because to him, branding seemed cruel, unnecessary, and honestly, a bit too much effort, because he couldn't really be bothered. So other ranchers in the area started noticing that any unbranded, free-roaming cow was very much likely to be one of Maverick's. So they started calling unbranded, independent cattle Mavericks.
That's cool.
And over time, that word jumped species from cows to humans. And so then, to anyone who refuses to conform or does things their own way, they become known as a maverick.
Unbranded and independent.
As an unbranded independent. I thought those two were brilliant.
Yeah.
Boycott and Maverick.
So it's a great way also to
Good stories.
claim all of the... If everybody else is branding their cows,
It's a genius.
then
isn't
you
it?
get all the ones that are unbranded.
Yeah.
That's probably
Oh.
his.
And he's not
you know.
doing any work either. He's just,
Yeah.
just got it.
Just relying on
It's just-
everybody else doing the work.
It's just nailed it.
But the thing was that he wasn't, that wasn't his intention. He wasn't being a maverick in that set. He was just basically doing nothing because he couldn't
Being
be bothered,
lazy.
which is almost the opposite of the term maverick. Fun.
Yeah. Look forward to the film played by Tom Cruise. Rob, you mentioned it, but yeah, I thought when I did this sketch, I thought, oh, actually, I'll add a tag to all of the sketches I've got that are eponyms, and it's now my number 6 most used category in Sketchplanations with 60
Eponym.
with 64 of them. I didn't really realize that I'd have so many, but as you say, like Campbell's Law, Dracula Sneeze,
Well, that's
Goldilocks Tasks, Douglas Fir, Mobius Strip, Spoonerisms.
Principle.
It just goes on and on. It's amazing.
We've done a number of them on the podcast.
Yeah.
But that's the thing. Everything needs a name, right? To define something. I don't know,
Yep.
Jono, when we're creating new products, we kind of have to come up with names for things the whole time, or kind of a new presentation or something like that. I like just giving things names because then there's no confusion. So everything needs a name. So why not be named after either the person you're trying to slur or the person who made it up or where it came from, and we haven't even got into food, cheddar cheese.
It can work after a place as well, can't it?
It
An
can.
eponym can be
Champagne
a place.
is a
Yeah,
is a
there you
classic.
Almost every food is named after, or classic food, or luxury food, potentially. There's a lot.
Some foods.
There's a
Yeah.
lot. All cheeses.
foods.
I'll just put it as
There's
cheeses.
a lot of cheeses.
All cheeses.
Mostly
Are there
cheeses.
other food? I'll stop.
Apple was named after Mr. Apple. Did you know that?
You reminded me one earlier, Tommy, when you talked about Tupper. Was it Mr. Tupper for Tupperware? Was it Thomas Crapper?
Seriously? Yeah,
Yeah,
the
there
toilet.
is.
became known as the Crapper. Yeah, for the toilet. Yeah, kind of a colloquial eponym, a colloquium.
Policeman being called Bobbies after Robert Peel, who created the police force.
Yeah,
Is that right?
oh, do.
Yeah.
Oh, so these are more colloquial ones.
Huh.
Crapper, Bobby.
Yeah, maybe we should stop.
Yeah. I also felt that could suddenly. I didn't have anything in mind, Tommy, but I just felt that was going in
Somewhere.
a direction, which it didn't.
They always go
But
in a
it could
direction.
do. It could do.
It could do.
The other context in which I'd heard the word eponymous or eponymously titled is music, and in their eponymously titled album, Blur, or their
Yeah.
eponymously titled
Yeah.
album, The Strokes, Fleetwood Mac, Beyonce. They've all done albums that were eponymously named.
Just named after themselves, yeah.
AOB, is there anything else anyone like to add before we round off our discussion on eponyms, which I have loved, by the way?
I would just add that if you like language concepts and terms, one of the other reasons to do eponyms was I've actually done lots of these kind of pieces of language. So you'll find sketches on acronyms and initialisms and capitonyms and heteronyms and homonyms and homographs and homophones and a few others on Sketchplanations if you want to follow the links.
And I will second that, because most of the reason I know what those are or have heard of those things is because of Jono's sketches. Although I do get confused between them every now and then. But hey, guess what? There's a really easy way for me to find out what's what again. Sketchplanations.com. Thank you, Jono. I want to add something, if I may. Use of eponyms in a historical context. Example, you're writing a historical novel and you think, oh, let's bang in something here about, oh, they were a real maverick, which was like 1800s, but your novel is based in the 1600s, let's say. In which case you can't use the term maverick. because it hadn't been invented at the time of when you're setting your novel or setting your story. I enjoyed that. I enjoyed that little thought experiment.
So like an anachronism from
Yes.
by using something that hadn't yet been invented. Like you've got like a period drama, but somebody's vacuuming the floor with a Hoover.
With a Hoover, if someone says, "Hey, you should go and Hoover that floor," but it's before the time the Hoover was invented.
Yeah,
but vacuums were around.
That would be a subtle one for somebody to point out, wouldn't it? Yeah.
But I just enjoyed that. I enjoyed that little nuance within it all.
No, that's good.
And this is way too gruesome for the podcast, but if you are interested in that little tidbit headline that I just gave you, the eponym embedded into the expression "Sweet Fanny Adams." If you look up Fanny Adams and who she was, it's quite a story. Quite a story.
Yeah, incognito.
Tommy, anything else you'd like to add?
No, I'm all good.
It's all good. Lovely. What are our takeaways from this episode then? I mean, one takeaway is that there are a lot of eponyms that are very, very surprising. Can I give my takeaway first?
Do it.
I'm working a little bit on the art of storytelling at the moment, aside from the podcast. And what I'd like to highlight from this episode is how almost every eponym, by its very nature, is this kind of little short story. And I think now I've made that connection, I've got this perfect excuse to start forming this little collection of eponym stories in my mind. And it is mainly for my own curiosity, but the other benefit is that they'll probably always be there, hopefully, in my head if I need to pull out the odd anecdote every now and then, I don't know, at a dinner party, let's say. So that little connection between stories and eponyms was really powerful for me. I love that about what we found out in this episode.
Definitely. Love it.
Any other takeaways?
I don't know if it's a takeaway or not, but my thought was a little bit into some of the discussion we had early on was that, you know, in some ways, having an eponym is like the definition of success if you're like a scientist or something, or if you're an astronomer and you spot Halley's Comet, and it's called Halley's Comet, you're like, oh yeah, I did a good thing. But it's also a bit of a strange thing to name something after you. So I think the best ones are where somebody else chooses to name something after you, assuming that you've done something good.
The Hubble telescope, that kind of stuff. Although obviously it happened years after he died.
Yeah, it's probably better is it better if they do it? It doesn't matter. Before or after you die.
Typically, it would be like journalists, right, that would start using that term in a public context. Is that right?
So my takeaway is you have to do Matthew McConaughey's strategy and seed it with the journalists secretly, but invent them yourselves.
I love it. I look forward to the next few articles and interviews that you do, Jono, where the journalist starts talking about, I'm really started to hate that.
Yeah. Everybody's calling it that these days.
When you draw something really intellectual and you make it very, very easy to understand, sort of when you hay something.
I do that, pay somebody a bit of money to start talking about it that way.
Yeah. So, Lord Sugar has actually stated what the definition of a Pellereau is in my last board meeting. He said,
"Can you repeat it?
If you ask someone to touch their left ear, what most people would do is they touch their left ear. A Pellereau is when you touch your left ear by using your right arm and you go over the top of your head. That is apparently in his belief that's a Pellereau. That sort of example of massively overcomplicating something for apparently no seeming reason. That's the definition of a Pellereau.
That's brilliant. That's how these things start, Tommy. Your legacy has just been set out.
Hopefully not.
We have a family one called a Tony.
Oh,
which
good.
Is where if you're having a party, but you've left it a bit late to get organised, what you do is in the afternoon of the party, you go to the supermarket and spend way too much money on food and booze and bring it all back. And then you've got an instant party, but you spend about 5 times as much as you intended.
This party's been totally tonified.
We were a bit short on time, so we just went and did a Tony, but it's all good now. They've already had a great time.
Well, listen, boys, that has been a fascinating little tiptoe through this wondrous element of our language. Thank you very much, chat. It's very, very fun. If you've any examples of your favourite eponyms that you'd like to share with us, then please do get in touch. Or actually, anything that you think we might have got wrong in that episode.
Very likely.
Then get in touch via the email address hello@sketchplanations.com, or you can leave us a voice note on the podcast website. But for now, you can call me a Luddite, but I've had enough of sitting here in my cardigan, staring at this screen for the evening. I'm off to make myself a massive Caesar salad, and if I don't finish, that'll be fine. I can always pop it in some Tupperware and stick it in the fridge. Actually, no, fridge doesn't work. Thanks for listening. Until next time, go well, stay well.
Brilliant.
Goodbye.
Cheers, everyone.
All music on this podcast series is provided by the very talented Frank Cinelli, and you can find many more tracks at frankcinelli.com.